only 20 minutes, so I'm going to throw myself into it without sort of introductory thoughts. And let me start by saying that I think that the city is an extraordinarily significant space, especially in particular epochs, and this is one of those epochs, when, and I'm going to show some of the negatives, when very powerful actors are controlling more and more of our lives, of the state, of society, etc., when you have more and more disempowered people. So the title comes out of this notion that the city is a complex but incomplete system. In that mix of complexity and incompleteness lies the possibility for a city to have a long life, to outlive all kinds of other systems. That's one extremely important point, I think, that history has shown us. Think of any city in Europe. They have lasted much longer than many powerful firms and kingdoms, than republics, etc., etc. Very important. Secondly, and that is why it's a combination of those two, the city is a space where those without power get to make an economy. Think of immigrant communities. Think of neighborhood economies. They get to make a culture. They get to make a history. There are very few places where that is possible. Now, when I do my research, I like to sort of remove myself. If I'm interested in cities or whatever the other subject might be, I need to move away till I lose city. So when I said at the beginning, the city is a complex but incomplete system, I've lost the city. And I want to lose it. I do that with the state, I do that with globalization, et cetera, and these are sort of what I like to think of as my analytic tactics, to revisit, to construct an object of study that is not the city, is the city. You know, how do I, and in that process, for instance, it becomes very clear that density is not enough to mark a city. Office parks are dense, but the powerless are not going to make a history there. There's all kinds of densities that are not city. So when people say the world is urbanizing, yes, density, built up terrain, but we're losing potentially a lot of what the city is. And I think the European tradition is extremely strong around cities. Anybody who knows the history, starting in medieval times, if not earlier, in Europe, knows the kind of particularly accomplished systematicity that it was. I'm not saying that they're always fair, just, no, they're not. There are real spaces where differences encounter each other. And I'm sure that the historians here know what I'm talking about. The first demographic records come from city governments or, authorities, et cetera, et cetera. Now, today, there are a bunch of processes that are happening vis-a-vis the city, as I just separated it or marked it as not simply density. And I just want to run, and they're very negative forces. And I want to run you very quickly through those forces, because it is a way of marking the urgency. I also hope that I will have a bit of time to address some of the issues that I heard in the discussion right now about smart cities. And why don't I say it right now to get it off my chest? And because it's still in the air, that discussion. My view is that the smart cities that we have are not smart enough. They're pretty dumb. And one key source of that dumbness, dumm, wie sagt man das auf Deutsch? I don't know what the translator is saying. Dummheit, die Dummheit, no, it's English, right? So it's that if the citizens are not part of that, if it's just corporate centered systems that say, okay, this, you know, that is not going to make it for a smart city. So I have developed this project on open sourcing the neighborhood. The grandmother has knowledge about the city, the child, the homeless person, you know, and that those knowledges, they are all part of the city. I'm just exaggerating when I say the homeless, the child, and the grandmother. Clearly, they are sort of a minority when you put it all together, but just to give an image. And so how do we access and make present those multiple different knowledges? Huh? So I just needed to say that. Now back to my subject. So I want to show you some figures, and I hope that they will be visible. I'm going to show you, as I said, some negative forces. So here is something that ground zero was the United States. The result right now, I don't know if people can read. I don't want to explain too much because I'm already running out of time. But basically, the development of a complex financial instrument that used, not helped, that used very modest little houses, mortgages on those houses. It's a familiar story by now. The result has been 15 million households out of their homes in a short, brutal history. And here are some of the figures every year. This is not cumulative, this is every year. A foreclosure does not mean necessarily that you're out, but most of these people, according to the central bank, the Fed in the United States, when Bernanke left, you know, a year ago, he said 14 million households out. That's in sort of a, you know, as you see, so here, and then I go on. So see, the first half of 2014, the latest data, another 600. These are households. In other words, we are talking about 30 million people. And again, one thing that I want to emphasize here is that this is invisible. In its materiality, all those people, all those empty houses, invisible. Because who's going to go to those empty neighborhoods? And because the system has a way of disappearing those millions. And you know, I like to think, I'm Dutch. Ich bin eine Holländerin. And so I mention it for numbers. So my country has about 16 million people. To make it Pythagorean, this number, you know, it's as if a voice from upstairs would say, all right, everybody on the territory of the Netherlands, out. And where you go, I don't know, but out. And now we're going to repeat the exercise. That is 30 million people. So, and again, theoretically, this is something I do in this new book of mine, Expulsions, all these material conditions that manage to become invisible. Invisible to our statistical categories, invisible to our conceptual categories. They are there, but we don't see them. Anyhow, I'm taking off here. Here is a sort of, just to give you a sense, look in the middle, the worst years, 2.800. I mean, do you know the numbers? These are enormous numbers. Now, oh, I don't have the European ones. I thought I had the European numbers. So Europe, Germany, we're in Germany, right? So Germany every year has about between 70 and 90,000 over the last 5 years foreclosed homes. Those numbers are much smaller than the United States, but they are significant. Germany, of all the, in the book I look at all the European Union countries, Germany is among the top in terms of foreclosures. Invisible. How many of you knew that? Now everybody raises their hand. I knew that. No. This is interesting stuff, that these material conditions in cities are so invisible. And of course they de-urbanize. Now, a second alarming trend is that buying urban land has become a really good investment. And I think people know that there have been quite a few interesting figures. So I'm working on a data set of 100 cities, which are the top recipients of national but it's corporate, national or foreign corporate investment. Now the question is, how do you buy urban land? Well, you buy it in the form of buildings, that kind of stuff. So it is a kind of, again, an invisible action. There is the building, it just changes ownership. You don't see it. You don't see that other economic history of displacement that is happening. I love, and people sometimes say, well, it's gentrification. No, it isn't. If we say, there is of course gentrification in there, but the term gentrification, is it familiar here? It's a deeper event. And one little vignette that some of you may have heard, and that it signals that it is not gentrification. The Qatari royals own more of London than the Queen of England. I love that story. I hope the translator gets it. But that tells you, gentrification, this is something else that is happening. There may also be one of the biggest plots of land in New York, the Atlantic Yards, has been bought by a Chinese company. Most New Yorkers don't know that. Now, it's a kind of space that used to be logistics, transport, and the hope was that it would become a park or something, for the people of the city. No, they're going to build 14 huge apartment buildings, luxury, and it's going to de-urbanize, add density, but de-urbanize the city, if you want. Now here I have some of these, that shows. And here you see, it's the top cities are the most, but then if you take the 100 that I'm working with, they sort of dribble down, etc. Berlin, by the way, very desirable, huh? Hamburg, and a few other German cities. München. Now here's when you look at foreign investment. London is the prima donna when it comes to foreign investment, and I think people have heard about this. It's been in the newspapers. It's quite interesting. And then again, Paris, Shanghai, the list changes a bit. But this is just to give you a hint, of what is happening. Now, there is another issue that is contributing to what I'm calling here the de-urbanizing of cities. So I'm not talking about just density and office parks, not being city. I'm talking about cities now. And that you have this buying up of cities, bad, and you have also this de-urbanizing. So here I want to run you through some data. I find this data terribly entertaining. I realize it might not be the case for you. So here, don't look at all the numbers. Just look at the top. Ratio, these are IMF staff papers, by the way. I recommend them to anybody who's interested. That's the stuff that doesn't get published, but it's very good work anyhow. So I always go rating in there. So ratio of household credit, I wonder how you say that in German, to personal disposable income. Now, credit sounds beautiful, no? Pretty at least. Credit is debt. Now, these 5 years were periods when the notion of debt expands. So like you saw in the prior slide, the bridge into even the most modest household by big financial firms is debt. Also by little banks. Huh? Now look at this, Hungary. Very low, 2000, these are countries that are not used to, whereas the United States was already 140, etc. 104%, I'm sorry. So look, Hungary, 11%, and then in 5 years, almost, what are we looking at? 33. It just increases threefold. That's a lot. Czechoslovakia, same thing. Now look at Germany. 70, you have to be proud of yourselves. 70, 70, 70, 70, 70. As if nothing had happened in the world. The Germans just stick to that 70%. which is actually a rather healthy level of debt to have, you know, because debt is a mechanism for making growth. Well, the United States just kept growing, 132%, you know, just way up there. Now, who owns that debt actually matters. If a local bank, a small local bank, a credit union owns that debt, it will reach the interest capacity that the households have in that town will recirculate. The interest is what you pay to buy that money, right? Will circulate in that community and add to the growth of the community. So who owns the debt matters. So again, I went raiding into the IMF staff papers. Huh? Look at Hungary. 40% is foreign owned, big banks especially. German, Swiss, and Austrian are the queens of the game there. That is not good. You understand, right? It takes it out. Now again, these are all invisible processes that produce a kind of erosion. All the franchises, in Germany you have 5 fewer franchises than we have in the United States. A franchise is going to take part of the consumption. You know what a franchise, like a Starbucks and I don't know what, you know, what a McDonald's, right. It's going to take part of the consumption capacity of a community, take it out to corporate headquarters, and who knows where they put it. So in the United States, we have a critical situation in our cities. And so I say, out with franchises. Create your own coffee shop. And in some places like Brooklyn, they are actually trying to do their own internet, or now they're being bought up by Google, I think. They're trying to do all kinds of things on their own, and it is actually working. It's totally pretty and unreal, but anyhow, there it is. So now I want to move on. I have only 5 minutes. Here's another bit, and what I'm really showing you is a tale. This is not urban. This is not urban per se, but I argue that it is part of the urban story. This is another story of displacement of loss by sort of the, if you want, the average person. This is rural land buying. So here are the figures. You look at the yellow one. In the last 6 years, 220 million hectares. It's also happening in Europe, by the way. French second generation who want to do farming because there are bad jobs otherwise. They can't buy land. It's been bought up. In the UK, huge amount of land has been bought up by foreign rural land. Now, why does this matter? Where do those people go? When a country, and I have a list of 93 contracts that I'm studying, that I studied for this book, Expulsions. When a country comes and buys 2.8 million hectares of land in Zambia and in other African countries to grow palm for biofuels, what happens? Well, I don't need to tell you. Floras and faunas expelled. People expelled. Rural manufacturing districts out, etc., etc. Where do they go? They go to cities. So, you know, when you hear politicians say most people now live in cities, yeah, but let's not put it like that. You know, let's see, well, what are some of this? A lot of these people are expelled from their land. So that adds to the pressure, you know, really what we see is the expansion of slums. Some slums are okay, but many slums are not. So I'm putting together these negatives. Now, I want to end back to city and why city matters and why these de-urbanizing forces that I've talked about are profoundly alarming. Even if the visual order, those fancy 14 luxury apartment buildings that the Chinese corporation is building in Atlantic Yards may look very pretty, but it de-urbanizes, and in that sense it takes away this political, cultural, economic making that one can do in cities. Now here is a final point why I argue we need cities, and that is the whole surveillance story. And I would have talked, I have quite a bit of data on this. Thank you, Mr. Snowden. Now, here is a map. Who has seen this map? Nobody? Oh, God. So most people, when I asked, they have not seen the map, but this is a map in the public domain. These are 10,000 buildings, mostly private, that do full-time surveillance. The I want to emphasize one aspect, the logic of this system. The logic is that for our security, we the people, we all first have to be suspect. That's quite a logic. So what do these 10,000 buildings do? They gather information data. If you have spent a week in the United States, you're in there, ladies and gentlemen. I am completely in there. So I feel free to say whatever. I would never put stuff that is not in the public domain because that would compromise all of you. So all I say is in the public domain. But the point is, look at that logic, that for our security, we first are suspect, because they gather data on all of us. My university, as do all the universities in the United States, is authorized to read my mail because we are under a mini state of security. So is Germany. You have a state of security, a mini state of security. What does that mean? That means that the state can violate its own laws. That's bad. In the United States, they really take that seriously. They take very seriously the violation of their own laws. The state does. Germany is probably a bit more civilized than that. But so my question then is, how do I handle that? All that. And you understand a lot of data gathering also in Germany, in France, I mean, other countries. And I say, I cannot be traumatized by this. Now, I know if I were Muslim and an activist against something, I might be in deep trouble. I'm probably in deep trouble. If I someday don't appear at a conference, it's probably because I am in deep trouble. But I then, the image that I have, and I want to end with this, it's a silly little image, but it's a reality. It's a mini reality. Imagine a very crowded set of spaces in the city, coffee shops, whatever, restaurants, whatever, but spaces where a lot of people are there talking. All the wires would get crossed. They wouldn't know what is what, who is what. The way this system works is that if, they're just gathering data, they're not surveying or analyzing all of those data, it would be impossible. But if somebody suspect appears, they can go back into all those data and see what are all the relations, all the other people that have connected to this suspect person. You understand what I'm saying, right? Well, if you take the space of the city, it would totally mess up, because it would be connected to just about everybody else, because all of these interferences. When in any city, if you are there, you open up, and you see a very, very, very long list of emails that will appear, right? I mean, networks, right? That you can, your neighbor, whoever is next to you with their mobile, etc. There is a lot of contamination, in other words. So it's just it's a light, humorous note that I'm ending with. That was it. That was the humorous note. But there is a truth to it. So just a final image. We really need cities. And cities are under great threat. It might just be that we will lose them because too many of them are deurbanizing. However, it's true that the small cities like Karlsruher, that's the future, I think. A lot of cities that people feel this is my city, as opposed to. That was a very nice note I wanted to leave with you, but I really mean it. It was not me trying to be charming. Thank you very much.